What if I told you that the most important moment from Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania 42 never actually aired on television? What if the conversation that could completely reshape the entire landscape of WWE happened not under the lights, not in front of the cameras, but in a quiet backstage corridor when almost everyone had already gone home? Stay with me, because what went down this past Monday was not just another episode of Raw. It was a statement. It was a turning point. And by the time we get to the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why the power structure of professional wrestling, as we know it, has been permanently altered. Paul Heyman walked out to that ring with an air of absolute confidence, surrounded by the Vision, flanked by Logan Paul and Austin Theory, the newly crowned WWE World Tag Team Champions, and standing tall alongside a returning Bron Breakker. Together, they reveled in everything that had gone wrong for Seth Rollins at WrestleMania 42. Heyman did not just gloat, he performed. He laughed at Rollins' suffering with the kind of theatrical cruelty that only Paul Heyman can truly deliver. He celebrated the destruction of a man who had once stood at the very top of this company, a man who had poured everything he had into building the Vision, only to be discarded the moment he was no longer useful to them. And then Seth Rollins came out of the darkness. He had a steel chair in his hands and fire in his eyes, and for a brief, electric moment, it felt like the architect was going to make them all pay. He cracked Bron Breakker across the skull with that chair, and the shot landed hard, landed high, and Breakker immediately began bleeding from the back of his head. The crowd inside the arena collectively held its breath. Officials scrambled toward the ring, but the Vision did not stop. Logan Paul and Austin Theory descended on Rollins like wolves, outnumbering him, overwhelming him, beating him down while Breakker staggered to recover. Seth Rollins, the man who built this faction from the ground up, was completely and utterly alone. Until he was not, because just when it seemed like there was no way out, when it seemed like the Vision was going to finish what they started at WrestleMania, two figures came sprinting down through the crowd. Montez Ford, Angelo Dawkins. The Street Profits had returned to WWE television for the first time in nearly 6 months, and they chose this exact moment to make their presence felt. The arena absolutely exploded. Ford and Dawkins stormed the ring and dismantled Theory and Logan Paul, clearing just enough space for Rollins to escape with his dignity intact. The three of them stood side by side as the Vision retreated up the ramp, and for the first time in a long time, Seth Rollins did not look like a broken man. He looked like someone who still had a war left to fight. But here is the part that has been consuming my thoughts ever since the broadcast ended. Where was Oba Femi during all of this? The Nigerian giant, the man who just weeks ago made the entire wrestling world stop and stare when he retired Brock Lesnar in his WrestleMania debut in under 5 minutes, had opened Monday Night Raw with one of the most commanding entrances we have seen in years. He stepped into that ring, looked out at the thousands of fans packed into that arena, and said just 4 words. "Your ruler has arrived." Then he dropped the microphone and walked away without another syllable. No explanation, no elaboration, just a declaration. Earlier at the WrestleMania post-show, Oba Femi had called out Roman Reigns directly, putting the tribal chief on notice and making it abundantly clear that he was not interested in waiting his turn or paying dues in the traditional sense. Roman responded with the kind of measured, dismissive confidence that only he can pull off, suggesting that the young Nigerian star still had something to prove before he could be taken seriously at that level. The tension between these two is already at a slow boil, and it is only going to get hotter. But when the Vision had Seth Rollins surrounded, when he genuinely needed someone to answer the call, Oba Femi was nowhere near that ring. He was not in the crowd, he was not on the ramp, he was not rushing down to make the save. He was watching from a distance, taking it all in, waiting for something. And what he was waiting for, it turns out, was the right moment to make a different kind of impact entirely. Because after the Street Profits had done their part, and the cameras had stopped rolling, and the arena had begun to empty out, Oba Femi found Seth Rollins in a backstage corridor. And what he said in that moment is the thing that every single person inside the WWE universe needs to understand before we get to Backlash. The footage has not made it to television yet, but the people who were there, the people who heard it firsthand, are describing it as one of the most genuinely moving moments in recent memory. Oba Femi approached Rollins not with a contract, not with an ultimatum, not with an agenda. He approached him with something that has become almost impossible to find in professional wrestling at the highest level. He offered loyalty, pure, uncomplicated, unconditional loyalty. He reminded Rollins that weeks ago, when Femi was just beginning to establish himself and needed someone to stand with him, Rollins had been there without hesitation. And now that the roles were reversed, now that Rollins was the one standing alone in the fire, Oba Femi was not going to look the other way. He told him directly that he had been watching, that he had seen everything Rollins had endured, that he understood what it meant to fight a battle that everyone assumed you had already lost. And then he made a promise. He told Seth Rollins that whenever he needed him, wherever he needed him, he would be there. Because in his words, the ruler does not abandon his people. Take a moment and really let that sink in, because the implications of this are enormous. Seth Rollins is a man who has been betrayed at nearly every turn in recent years. He invested years of his life and his creative vision into building the vision, only to be cast aside the moment Paul Heyman decided he was a liability. He mentored Bron Breakker with genuine care and investment, only to have Breakker turn on him during a moment of physical vulnerability after the shoulder injury at Crown Jewel. He has been humiliated in front of thousands of people, left laying in the center of the ring on multiple occasions, and forced to fight every battle entirely on his own. The Street Profits returning is meaningful, and it gives him backup in the short term. But Oba Femi offering his loyalty is something on an entirely different level. This is not a temporary alliance of convenience. This is not two people with overlapping enemies deciding to work together for mutual benefit. This is one of the most dominant forces to emerge in WWE in years, choosing to stand beside a veteran who the entire establishment had written off. And that changes everything. The wrestling internet has been on fire since Raw went off the air. Fans are already speculating about what a Rollins and Oba Femi partnership looks like in practice, how it intersects with Femi's brewing rivalry with Roman Reigns, and what Paul Heyman's next move will be now that the Vision suddenly has to contend with not one but multiple threats coming from different directions at the same time. The Street Profits add energy and athleticism and momentum, but Oba Femi adds something else entirely. He adds the kind of credibility that only comes from walking into WrestleMania for the first time in your career and pinning Brock Lesnar clean in the center of the ring in front of the whole world. You cannot buy that kind of credibility. You cannot manufacture it. You either have it or you do not, and Oba Femi has it in abundance. Paul Heyman is one of the sharpest minds in the history of this business, and even he could not have anticipated this. He had a plan. The plan was to dismantle Seth Rollins completely, to make an example of him, to send a message to anyone else who might consider standing up to the Vision. Bron Breakker's interference at WrestleMania was supposed to be the final nail. Rollins was supposed to be finished. But Heyman did not account for the Street Profits coming back, and he certainly did not account for the Nigerian giant deciding that Seth Rollins was worth his protection. The ruler does not abandon his people. That is not just a promise to one man. That is a message to the Vision, to Paul Heyman, to Roman Reigns, to every single person in that locker room who thought they knew how this story was going to end. Because if Seth Rollins on his own is one of the most dangerous performers in the history of Monday Night Raw, imagine what he looks like standing next to the man who retired Brock Lesnar in his very first WrestleMania match. That is not a rivalry anyone wants to be on the wrong side of. And yet, here we are, heading down the road to Backlash with all of these pieces moving at the same time, and the picture they are forming is unlike anything we have seen in WWE in a very long time. We want to know what you think about all of this right here in the comments section. Do you believe this is the beginning of the most dangerous alliance WWE has seen in years? How do you think Paul Heyman is going to respond when the full weight of what Oba Femi just committed to truly sinks in? And what does Bron Breakker do now that the man he helped destroy at WrestleMania suddenly has the most powerful rookie in the business watching over his shoulder? Drop your thoughts down below, because this conversation is just getting started. And if you want to be right here for every single development as the road to Backlash continues to unfold, not the surface-level recaps, not the recycled headlines, but the real analysis and the real story behind what is happening inside that ring and beyond it, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Wrestling Juice, hit that notification bell, and make sure you never miss a single moment of what is shaping up to be one of the most unpredictable and electric stretches in WWE history. Because after what we witnessed on Raw, after the Street Profits made their return, after Oba Femi looked Seth Rollins in the eye and made that promise, I genuinely do not think any of us are fully prepared for where this is all heading. I will see you in the next one.